A controversy over unionizing in Connecticut is moving from the Capitol to the courts. We will have an extended discussion about unionization affecting daycare and home care workers. Then a Connecticut company is buying and refurbishing affordable housing and going green while they do it. We will take a look at the public-private partnership that some say is creating an environmental evolution in the state. Hi, you're watching The Real Story. I'm Lori Perez. We have been hearing a lot over the past year across the country about collective bargaining, the so-called assaults on it, to here in Connecticut, where the GOP says Governor Malloy is forcing personal care attendants and daycare workers to unionize. Connecticut's debate began, or heated up, I should say, with the executive orders that the governor issued in September, allowing both groups to form unions. Child care workers have already voted to unionize, and the ballots have been sent out to personal care attendants now. Here now to talk about what that all means is Representative Rob Sampson, Maureen Nelson of Connecticut Daycare Providers Association, and the Governor's Deputy Counsel, Chris Drake. Thanks all of you for being here. And let's start off with, you know, what you think it does mean. I mean, what does it mean to you, or what did you think, Chris, when the governor sent out those two executive orders, especially, and some people have made the point that, you know, the Senate debated and decided against two bills last year that would have afforded these groups these rights, and why was it the right thing to do?
So in your intro, you mentioned the word unionization, and I think it's important to make clear what the executive orders actually do. The executive orders don't establish unionization. In fact, what they do is they allow family child care workers and personal care attendants, home care workers, to vote to establish a majority representative, and that majority representative would then enter into completely non-binding discussions with the Commissioner of Department of Social Services and Developmental Services. And so we think that's completely different than unionization. I think most people sort of understand the concept of unionization, which is a formal legal arrangement between an employer and an employee that results in a binding collective bargaining agreement, and that's not what the governor set up here.
But it was kind of a segue to unionization then, right?
It's certainly an interim step to it, yes.
Okay, and Representative Sampson, I mean, what's wrong with that?
Well, I would say first and foremost that the executive orders are absolutely binding. They do set up the process for unionization, and as you stated from the outset, the daycare providers have already voted, and there is a union in place. The governor essentially in the executive orders establishes the process by which that unionization will take place, including the rules for that election and so forth, and that's just one of the many things within the executive orders that I have a problem with, because I don't believe the governor has the authority, that would be the authority of the legislature, to set up the rules for which any group would unionize. And in fact, I think that the daycare providers and PCAs, had they wanted to do this on their own, which I would absolutely be behind them 100%, and I wouldn't be here today. I think if they tried to do it on their own, they wouldn't be able to, because I think there are far too many labor laws that prohibit groups such as daycare providers and PCAs from unionizing, because they are not, they don't have a collective, they're not in the same group. You know, when you think of a union, it's typically people that all work for the same company or the same industry, and they have a common set of, you know, things that they live under. These are individual small business people that are running their own individual businesses, and they happen to be on the final receiving end of a subsidy that is for someone else. The parents of kids that are in daycares, in the case of daycare providers, and ultimately the daycare provider gets a check, but ultimately that money is not for them. So the fact that that state money is attached to it is not a good enough reason for me to put them in a union. So
let's just start off with, first of all, Chris, I mean, is that accurate that had they tried to unionize without this creating a majority representative, that they would not have been able to, that they would have been unsuccessful?
Yeah, so I want to make clear that I agree with Representative Sampson on the notion that without some legal form, there would not have been a mechanism through which the family child care workers or the personal care attendants could unionize. And that's probably where the governor and Representative Sampson part ways. The governor feels strongly that there should be an opportunity for them to organize, and I think that that's important to point out, because this issue has been framed such that it's been framed in the context of forced unionization, and that can't be further from the truth. The governor is for for choice. The governor is for allowing family child care workers and personal care attendants the choice to join a union. He's not for forcing anyone to join a union. And I just want to reiterate my first point is that the executive orders don't even go to unionization. They just simply set up a mechanism that allows family child care workers and home care workers to enter into talks with the state government.
And so I guess, Marie, if you could get involved, I mean, because Representative Sampson made the point that without this, likely would have failed. So what's wrong with, as Chris said, creating a mechanism for the opportunity?
Had daycare providers asked for that opportunity, that would be different. But I was visited by the union. We were told what union. There wasn't a choice of choosing a particular union for us to choose or vote for. The voting process that was set up created a system that was extremely biased. They allowed them to use the Care for Kids list to vote for daycare providers to become unionized. If there's only 2,600 daycare providers that are licensed in the state of Connecticut, and not all of them are receiving the subsidy, and there were 4,000 ballots sent out, who did those ballots go to that got to choose whether I unionized or not? And if it was actually meant to be a choice, I'm a little confused as to why the state didn't send us any kind of documentation giving us and explaining the reasoning behind what he was trying to do. We've received nothing. Outside of a union representative knocking on our door, we've received nothing. No flyers, no any kind of paperwork telling us what people are deciding. So from my perspective, I was in my home doing my job watching the kids, and I heard about a ballot going out, and then as a person who should have received a ballot, I didn't.
So I guess what would be your response to that? I mean,
So the executive order sets out exactly why the governor thought this was important. He values the contribution that you make to children that you serve, and that's why he thinks that it's important to set up a mechanism to allow people to collectively bargain and hopefully rid the state of turnover in the industry, hopefully provide some sort of training to the family child care workers, and basically, and in the end game, hopefully provide some semblance of increased wages or perhaps health benefits down the road. And he wants to give you the opportunity to collectively voice your concerns.
And I guess I would say to you then, prior to issuing an executive order, why didn't he reach out to the daycare community to talk to us and see what direction we wanted to go in, if in fact that was the direction? As far as unionization, I am not anti-union. I am, however, anti-having my choice taken away. I am not for not having an open forum to discuss what they're trying to do to my business. I'm self-employed. I work for myself. There is no employer-employee triangle here for them to work for. The things that the union has come out and said is the Care for Kids subsidy, which is for low-income families. We just received the check for them. As far as the education, there are so many programs throughout the state of Connecticut for child care providers, and within my own community, we fund and put up all kinds of workshops, not just for providers, but for parents as well. As far as health insurance, there's many other ideas and available programs for people to utilize. So to say that those things are, health insurance and, a 401k and all of those things, I say to you, then where's the money going to come from? Because you're going to take it from the people that actually need it, which is our children. If money's being spent on royalties, it's not going to who it was intended for, and the children need it. The parents need relief. So there's no money. Our state is broke. We all know that as taxpayers.
Do you want to respond? Or I was just going to make a point. I mean, that being said, well, your group already has voted.
Well, and not everyone in our group had that opportunity, which is something that we're quite upset about. There's 25 some odd people who voted whether we should unionize or not that aren't even licensed child care providers in our state. They're grandmas and grandpas. Why did they get to choose whether I'm unionized or not, unless the intention is to further down the line unionize them, which if you look at the very specific writing in the executive orders, they refer to regulations for child care providers that do reflect grandmas and grandpas, neighbors, daycare providers, and center-based daycares.
So you have a problem with the vote, because I mean, I've been involved in several union efforts in several companies. All of them failed because of the vote. But you have contentions with how the vote was.
Yeah, I don't think that the voting was conducted fairly. It shows when you talk to providers who didn't receive their ballots, who didn't know what they were, and were suggested to, if they weren't sure what they wanted to do, leave it to the people who were confident what they wanted to do. Well, that's not sending in your ballot. It's like saying yes. So it's akin to a yes vote. So we didn't have a fair representation of people, whether they were interested or not. And I think that's where we're coming from.
Well, there's a lot of things there. I think, number one, we should point out that the executive order set up a work group to study the issue of formal collective bargaining, and I'm sure you were involved with the process. And that group met, and it didn't involve anyone from our administration. It involved members from the executive branch, but it did not involve anyone from the governor's office.
It did not involve any home daycare providers either, and I did attend one of the meetings for that. And what I found to be very alarming was that the people that were not in a position to be recognized as political that sat on that committee were at the public hearing last week to vote on Bill 352, wearing purple in support of the union. So I could go around the table with you one for one and tell you that that was not a group set up to decide whether we should collective bargain. It was actually a group set up to decide how we could legally collective bargain.
Can I just jump in really quick?
Sure. I'm going to give you a minute, and then I'm going to give you ability to respond, and then we got to wrap it up.
Sure. Just very simply, this is an issue about freedom, and that is where I part ways with the governor, period. He has taken it upon himself to put through a top-down effort to put these folks into a union regardless of their own desire, period. And that's true for the daycare providers and the PCAs.
This is a national movement.
Yes, it's a national movement. It's going on in many, many states. No two daycare providers got together and said, gee, we need to do something about the Care for Kids system, and we must form a union to make that happen. It didn't work out that way. What happened is the governor took it upon himself, despite 3 times now in the legislature, an effort to make that happen through the proper channels in the law, and he did it himself, and essentially has taken the rights away from individuals who do not want to be part of the union, and not just individuals that work for some company or the state. These are small business owners, individual business owners. They don't have any obligation to the state in any way, shape, or form. They should not be required to join a union of other state employees.